Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to Tech 411. Today I'm going to show you what I feel are all the best settings for the Brave web browser to ensure maximum security and privacy while also minimizing the impact on usability. If you're new here, my name is Ken and I make videos about getting the absolute most out of all of your technology. If that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and click on subscribe. And when you subscribe, if you hit that notification bell and you turn on all notifications, you'll never miss out on any of our upcoming content. And remember to hit that like button so others can find us easier on YouTube. So let's get started. So here we are on our Windows desktop. I just booted in here, and this is the first screen we're going to get when we launch our Brave browser. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the Brave browser as our default browser. This is the browser I want to use as the default for everything because it's going to have my optimal privacy settings. Now, if you look down in the video description, I'll have another video on how I optimize Microsoft Edge for the same kind of privacy setup and maximum security with maximum usability. So we're going to go through and I'm just going to select everything and set Brave as the default. Just go through this really quickly here. Anything that says Microsoft Edge currently, I want to switch that over to Brave because I really don't want to use Edge for anything if I don't have to. Edge still does run as part of the operating system, and unless you do some trickery, you really can't remove it from Windows 11. So I do recommend you also look at my video on hardening Microsoft Edge. Make sure your privacy is protected. Sometimes when you click on links, they'll open in Edge anyway, and so you want to make sure you're still in a maximum privacy mode when you get into there. So we've got everything set as the default. So I'm going to go ahead and skip over this at this point. We don't want to import anything. We don't want better search results. And I'm going to choose not to send any data to Brave. Okay. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click on Settings. The first thing I want to do is I want to customize the new tab page. The new tab page is going to allow me to do searching. Now, I don't necessarily have to use Brave as the search engine. I don't want to show these background images either because they take up a lot of memory. Here I can also enable additional search engines. Another one I like to enable in here is DuckDuckGo. They're also a privacy-focused search engine. So Brave and DuckDuckGo are a good choice. You can add others if you're a little less concerned about privacy, but just be aware that, especially with Google and Bing, they do a lot of data collection. I don't want to show the top sites on my new tab page. I don't want Brave News. I do like to show the clock. And I typically will go through and disable a lot of these cards. Okay. And instead of a background image, let's go with a nice gradient here. The blue one looks kind of nice. But really, this can be anything you want. This is not really a privacy setting. Let's go back into our settings once again. And on startup, I typically like to open the new tab page. I don't want to open up a website that I was previously on because I may not want to go back to that website. So we have that set. We have our new tab page customized. We're going to go into our appearance. I always like to show the home button, and when I click on home, it takes me back to the new tab page. A lot of these settings can be left. I do like to point out that this does save data here on your device, browsing history, bookmarks, quick commands, and so on. You can turn that off if you're a little more concerned about privacy, but this doesn't necessarily send that info to Brave. This stores it on your device. I like to use the wide address bar, and I always like to show the full URLs. Okay, so that's appearance. Next, we're going to get into content, and here's where I'm going to do some more customization. So we can set the font size, page zoom, and all that kind of stuff. We can turn off the Wayback Machine prompt on 404 pages. I like to leave that on because I find it handy sometimes, but I do turn off the speed reader. Now the speed reader is a very useful tool, so you can leave that on if you do find it useful. I don't really like it that much. I like to view what's actually on the website, but otherwise I'm not really going to do too much there. The shields is where I'm going to do most of my configuration. So the first thing I'm going to do is show the number of blocked items on the shield icon. So the shield icon will light up and it'll show me the number of items that are currently being blocked for that site. Now I'll show you in a second that you can adjust the shield for each site, which is what we're going to do, but we're going to set things really secure by default. And then on sites that we trust, we can lower that security a little bit. And I'll show you that in a second. But for trackers and ad blocking, we're going to do aggressive. We're also going to do strict upgrade connections to HTTPS. This is going to keep us from potentially leaking unencrypted information over the internet. So anything that goes to a non-secure website is automatically going to try to redirect to a secure website instead. We are going to block scripts. Now this is going to break pretty much every site you visit, but the important thing to note here is this is going to block JavaScript from running by default. We don't necessarily, when we go to a website, always want every script on that page to run. And we want to make sure that when we go there, we can click a button to enable the scripts instead of having them automatically on for everything. So that's what the block scripts is going to do. We're going to block scripts, block fingerprinting. We're going to block third-party cookies. We are also going to turn off the share contact information for broken site reports. We're going to turn both of these off for privacy reasons. We don't want to allow Facebook logins or X embedded tweets. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to click content filtering down here. And when we go in here, we've got different filter lists. Now, important thing to note here, you can block a ton of stuff here, but this will dramatically slow down the performance of Brave. The more filter lists you load, the slower Brave is going to be because it's going to have to check against all those filter lists. There's two that I like to use, okay? There's the obtrusive cookie law notice removal. The mobile notifications, I like to turn that off because sometimes I want that switch to app notification. But one thing I do turn on here as well is the bypass paywalls. Some of you may find that useful. You can bypass a paywall, and there's a ton of other filters in here that you can turn on. And you can also load custom filter lists. Okay, so that's going to take care of all the content filtering for us. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into privacy and security. And under delete browsing data, one thing I tell everyone to set is on exit. At the very least, on exit, you want to clear all the cached images and files that are stored on your computer because chances are they're not going to be needed the next time you open up Brave. And what can happen over time is that cache can get large, and then you can start running into performance issues and weird glitches, and then you have to try to figure out what's going on and come in here and clean the cache. This solves that problem. Every time you close the browser, it's going to clean the cache. If you're really concerned about privacy, you can have it clear a bunch of other things as well. But note, if you clear cookies and site data every time you close Brave, any sites that you chose to remember your login for are no longer going to remember your login. And obviously, you can clear a lot of other stuff as well. I choose to only clear the cached images and files. And I click Save to that. When I click on Security, we've got standard protection here. We've also got Secure DNS. We want to make sure that's on. Now you can choose the OS default, which is to use the Secure DNS provider when it's available, or you can go in here and manually specify one. And there are 4 different options here: Google OpenDNS, Clean Browsing, and Cloudflare. And then you can also add your own custom DNS service provider. and you put in the HTTPS URL here for that. We're going to leave ours at OS default. And we don't really need to do anything else in there in security. When we go into the site shields and settings, we can look at all the permissions. Now, we just set up this browser, so we don't have any permissions here that have been set up. And we do want to make sure, however, that we have this option selected all the way at the bottom. And this option will automatically remove permissions from unused sites. So what this prevents is you visiting a site, and sometimes all of us are guilty of this. We click through, and sometimes we click things we really didn't intend to click. So, for example, if you enabled notifications for a site that you visited one time and you never visited again, you may get a ton of pop-up notifications. Well, eventually this is going to remove that permission because you're not going to be using that site. But nonetheless, I tell everyone to come in here and check this area frequently, at least once a week or once a month, as often as you're able to do, and make sure that all the websites that are listed in here is having permission to things like your location, your camera, your microphone, that those are all sites that you really want to have access to those things. And if they're not, you can come in here. For example, I can click on camera and I can remove the sites that have access to the camera. Another thing I can do is if I don't want any sites to have access to the camera, I can just select don't allow sites to use my camera at all. And that really secures my browser down because it's not going to let anybody use my camera. So we can go back. The next thing we're going to do is go through our list down here. We're not going to do anything with the WebRTC IP handling policy. That's kind of a separate thing. I'll put a link down in the video description explaining a little bit about WebRTC. But I like to leave this at the default unless you have a really good and you know the reason why you want to change it, because it can cause some other issues. I always like to turn off the feature to use Google services for push messaging. We can use auto redirect for tracking URLs and AMP pages. We do want to prevent sites from fingerprinting us based on our language preferences. We also definitely want to block Microsoft Recall, and if you can, remove it completely from your device. I always like to send a do not track request with my browsing traffic, so we are going to turn that on. It'll give us a message, read that message, and if you agree to it, confirm. Private window with Tor. This gives us an extra level of security. When we go up here and we want a new private window, we can select one that has Tor, which gives us even higher level of privacy and anonymity. I'll have another video coming out soon about even higher level anonymity, because there are still ways that you can be tracked even when you use Tor. However, this is going to allow you to conceal yourself a lot more if you're maybe going to a website and you don't want them to know that you visited. So that I like to leave on. The resolution of a .onion addresses will automatically open in Tor windows, which is what we want. Now, I don't want to volunteer to help others connect to the Tor network, and I don't want to turn on bridges. Those aren't necessary for me. Definitely read those. They may apply in your area or for your specific use case, and if you need to turn those on, you can. We don't want product analytics. We don't want to send a daily usage ping. And we don't want to send any diagnostic reports. Obviously, if you want to do those things, you can. These are just the things that I prefer. Web3, I don't really do too much in here. I like to make sure that all these things down here are set to ask. I always like to ask. The Leo AI, that's really up to you if you want to use that. Probably safe to leave that on. Obviously, sync. If you do use sync, if you want to sync over multiple devices, make sure you keep your code secure and you check your device list. So if there's a device in there that you don't recognize, you can remove it and prevent your data from synchronizing to devices that you either aren't using anymore or you may not have authorized. Next is the search engine. And for normal Windows, it currently has Google. I'm going to go ahead and change that to Brave. I recommend you use either Brave or DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is actually a good option. I'm going to set that as the default. And for private Windows, we'll use the Brave search engine. We don't want to improve any search suggestions, and we don't want to index other search engines. We can go in here and manage search engines and site search, and you can add search engines in here, remove ones that you don't want to use. And this gives you shortcuts. So if you do want to do a one-time Google search, this shows you how to use a shortcut to do that. Under extensions, we want to make sure the Google login for extensions is off. The media router enables the cast feature. If you're not going to be casting to any devices from your browser, you can turn that off. Wildvine may need to be on if you're doing any streaming or anything like that. Usually that's required for DRM, so that may need to be on. We can manage our extensions from in here. It's always a good idea to know what extensions are installed in your browser. If you're not using them, turn them off or remove them, because they do use up additional memory, and extensions can cause weird issues with websites. I've seen it over and over again. The next is autofill and passwords. Now, I do use a password manager. I use 1Password, so I typically will go in here and make sure that the password manager is set and that we don't have any passwords stored in here. So we're going to go into settings and uncheck offer to save passwords. I don't want to save them in the browser and sync them through the Brave Sync. I want to use a dedicated password manager for my passwords. I also don't want to sign in automatically. Typically, I like to check for spelling errors. If you have privacy concerns, you can turn that off. I have, of course, my language selected. We can use Brave Translate. Again, if you don't want to use that, you can turn that off. Downloads, make sure you have your preferred download location set. Also, make sure that these are on. Show downloads when they're done and ask you where to save before downloading. In Microsoft Edge, it just downloads, and I can't tell you how many people have asked me, well, I downloaded, where did it go? Of course, it goes to the downloads folder by default, but a lot of folks don't realize that. When it asks you, you tell it where you want to save the file, which is what I like. And of course, under accessibility, we have a lot of different options in here, okay? The defaults are fine in there. Under system, we have some additional options in here. This can cause an issue running apps in the background when Brave is closed. If you don't want it to do that, you can turn that off. Unless you have extensions that are running in the background, it's probably safe to turn this off. Graphics acceleration, kind of self-explanatory. If you see visual artifacts or whatever, some graphics cards don't work so well, or sometimes the driver will update and that'll happen. You can turn that off if you have display issues within your browser, and that usually resolves it. Okay, and you can see all these different things in here. If you use Brave VPN, you can select the WireGuard protocol. Now, the last thing here at the bottom is the memory saver. And I don't know why Brave turns this off by default, but I always like to turn this on, and at the very least use the balanced energy savings, memory savings, but more often than not, I go with the maximum. And what this does is if you have a tab open that you're not using, it will put that tab to sleep, free up that memory. So if you have a bunch of tabs open and you're not using them, this can be a huge saver of system resources and prevent your system from slowing down and really getting bogged down. So I typically turn that on and set it to either balanced, or if it works for you, maximum. And when I go to YouTube, this is where I'm going to control everything in the Brave browser. I have this little shield icon up here. It's telling me that a lot of things are blocked. And when I open this up, I can see the trackers, ads, and more that are blocked. The shields are up. Now I can just turn everything off for this site, but I don't recommend you ever do that unless you absolutely have to. What I recommend you do is come down here to advanced controls. Now, as we can see that I talked about earlier that a lot of sites are not going to work when you turn scripts off or when you turn blocking of scripts on, but that's what we want. We don't want sites to automatically run these scripts. Now, with YouTube, you can see nothing has loaded up here, but if I come in here, I can turn off script blocking, but it's only going to turn it off for YouTube, and it's going to remember that I turned it off the next time I visit. And as you can see, when I turned that off, YouTube immediately loaded up. And if I click on Shorts, it's going to show some stuff in there. But this is how we control what's being blocked on different websites in Brave. I really like Brave for this reason. I can completely lock down this browser, and then I can control on a site-by-site basis what is enabled and what is not. So what settings do you use in your Brave browser? Let us know down in the comments section. Also, if we got anything wrong, let us know down there as well. We always love to hear from you. Remember to like, subscribe, and when you subscribe, hit that bell so you get notified anytime we add new content. Hug the people you love, and we will see you next time.